Welcome to Semeion. Yeah, God did that. Episode 4, The Eye, Part 2, The Brains Behind What You See. In Episode 3, we went over irreducible complexity and the physical anatomy of the human eye. And I know we went over a great deal of detail on the anatomy, and I'm sure that some of the eyes in the audience glazed over as we ran through it. But each part is very important to the functionality of the whole. Irreducible complexity is the understanding that the individual components of a complex system must be present and functioning in order for that system to function. For a very basic illustration of irreducible complexity, let's look at a three-legged stool. This stool consists of 4 parts in total, 3 legs and 1 seat. If the stool did not have a seat to sit on, then it would have just 3 sticks with nothing to hold them together, and the basic function of a chair could not be achieved. If the stool only had 2 of its legs, then it would not be able to support itself and would fall over. In order for the stool to function as a place to sit, then it needs all 3 legs and a seat. It must be whole before it is functional. Now, do you see how this irreducible complexity can be applied to the amazing complexity of the eye? If any of the 12 components we mentioned were not present, then the effectiveness of the whole eye would be greatly reduced. In the absence of several key parts, the eye would not be functional at all and would be of no value. Thus, the statistical probability of evolving an eye with so many key parts necessary for its function is so small to be unfathomable. Darwin understood the general nature of this problem as well. Quote, "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down." Since the eye, as the second most complex organ in our body, could not have been formed by a process of minor changes, then the application of Darwin's theories is unreasonable. Evolutionists will argue that eyes exist, therefore it is possible to evolve them. But this is a flawed argument, confusing presence to process. Existence does not define origin. For instance, if you ran across a woman with rainbow-colored hair, you would not assume that her hair grew that way on its own. However, you would include the concept of hair dye, and maybe some questionable decisions, in your theory about how she ended up that way. The problem is that those that try to explain how the human eye evolved do not include an understanding of God in their toolbox, and must thus fall back on incredibly limited, flawed constructs to try to explain what God has done. But the truth of the matter is that the incredibly complicated machine that is the human eye is only a small part of the puzzle. Do not forget that having an eye is all well and good, but you must be able to process the vast amount of information that the eye gathers. The optic nerves take all the gathered information and send it to the brain so that sight can become vision, and vision is where God's design is most impressive. The brain does amazing things that you probably have never even thought about. It processes the data collected by both eyes and turns it into something that you can understand in as little as 13 milliseconds. That's 77 times a second. And most of the processing is done even faster than that. The processing requirements to get to even the basic constructs of vision consumes around 50% of the brain's activity and is still far, far superior to any computer processing developed to date. Let us first consider just a few things that the brain does to help you get a little perspective on vision. First, the image that passes through the lens is upside down and flipped. Now, this is just the physics of light passing through the lens. The brain, however, does not actually flip the image over at any point, since there is no need to. What you see is not actually displayed on a little screen in your head and then processed. But even more impressive is that the brain has an understanding of what right side up is, and processes the images based on that understanding. You can test this by holding your head at a 90-degree angle and looking at a room. Your brain uses the visual components of the image to establish that the objects do still appear to be right side up, and only your view of the room has changed. However, if we just turn a chair over, since only that aspect of the image has rotated versus our understanding of right side up, then the brain will identify the object as being on its side. Context is very important. The brain is so good at this functional orientation that if you have somebody wear a special pair of glasses that inverts the image before it enters the eye, such that the world really does look upside down, most people can adapt in as little as a few days, to the point that they can do complicated activities like ride a bike, and many report that the world actually seems right side up again. We do not yet have a great understanding of how the visual cortexes process the vast quantity of information provided by the eyes, despite many decades of research. The multiple systems that are processing the information simultaneously in parallel while combining to create the bigger picture is nothing short of an amazing miracle. Research has identified individual regions of the brain that are believed to process different aspects of the image at the same time. There's one area that processes shape or form and is sensitive to just the edges of objects. There's another area that processes color, another area that processes depth and shadow, and a fourth region that does movement and relative location, tracking, and spatial organization. Depth is another amazing part of the processing, though. We actually only see in 2D, but since we are blessed with two eyes, we have what is called binocular vision. Depth, which is necessary for a 3D understanding of the world around you, is done via a process called binocular disparity. The brain combines the images of the left and right eye and automatically corrects for the position of an object on the two separate retinas. This helps with depth perception because the greater the disparity between the two images, the closer the object is. You can play with this system by closing one eye then the other while holding an object at different distances. The brain also actively combines the two images together with shifting focal perception, which can lead to the invisible finger effect. If you hold your finger out in front of you pointing up, and then bring it towards your right eye, you will quickly notice a focal shift and the brain will begin to remove the finger from the combined image, making it invisible. But if you close one eye then the other, you will see the difference between the two images and you will find your finger to be quite solid. You might not be aware, though, that both of your eyes have a relatively large blind spot. The region that the optic nerves attach to the retina does not contain any rods or cones and thus has no visual information to provide. The brain, however, automatically corrects your blind spot in both eyes by filling in the void with the content of the surrounding image. This is easily tested with a process known as the dot test. On a piece of paper or index card, put an X on the right-hand side and a solid dot on the left-hand side. Cover your right eye and focus your left eye on the X. Move the paper slowly back and forth while focusing on the X until the dot disappears. Notice that the blind spot is actually a pretty good sized spot. The brain automatically fills in this spot based on all that it understands about the area around it. This is a constant process and is so efficient and seamless that most people are never aware that it exists. Also remember that your vision system has persistence memory and predictive calculations. When you turn your head and an object leaves your field of vision, you have a memory of its existence and a subsequent expectation of it still being there when you turn back to it. Likewise, if that object is in motion, you have a memory of that motion and a predictive capacity of its trajectory to such a degree that you can look ahead to where it is going and not be surprised when it gets there. Think of a baseball pitcher throwing a ball. The visual information is processed and compiled into a prediction of where the ball will be at a future moment in time, so that you can judge the trajectory and timing to swing a bat to hit the ball. Think of image persistence like this. If I'm looking at a person that is standing still on the left side of my visual field and I turn all the way around clockwise so that they appear on the right-hand side of my field of view, then everything is fine. But if I only get halfway around before they appear on the right-hand side of my view, then something has gone very wrong. Your ability to recognize the positive and negative aspects of the persistence object location is incredibly fast and is fundamental to successful vision. Also, the peripheral vision from the eye is not really anything like you perceive it to be. The primary focal region of the retina is an area known as the fovea centralis and contains almost all of the cone cells that are responsible for detailed color vision in the retina. The area beyond this focal point contains primarily rods, which detect about 30 shades of gray and naturally have less focal acuity the further you get away from the fovea. These regions of the retina are thus primarily black and white and are very fuzzy or out of focus the further away they get from the focal center. The brain moves your eyes and shifts your focal point as often as 3 times a second to help acquire as much data as possible of our environment. Your brain then adds all this information together and improvises all the missing information, allowing you to have a much more complete view of the world around you. Your eyes are also incredibly high-resolution cameras. The resolution of the human eye is a staggering 576 megapixels. Compare this to the fancy camera in your phone, which is at best about 50 megapixels. Your eye is greater than 10 times higher in resolution. The many ways that the human brain processes vision is considerably greater and more complicated than even these amazing processes that we have touched on. This further lends to the argument of irreducible complexity, and that a large number of these complex systems must be present for the eye to be of benefit to the organism. One can have an eye, but it is useless without the ability to process the information that comes from it, and vice versa. To say it another way, the ability to process the image from the eye is useless without the ability to interpret the image and understand its contents and context, and then apply that information with our ability to interact with God's creation around us. We are truly blessed to see firsthand the work of God, the Father, the Creator, in the world around us. Semeion! Yeah, God did that.